Should we feed Raikou a Master Biscuit? How about a Dragonite? Has my opinion changed since the start of the game where I recommended that Tyranitar be the only one of enough value to warrant a Master Biscuit? That is not to say that Tyranitar is actually good for your Master Biscuit. That was only to say that out of all available Pokemon at the start of the game, Tyranitar was the one that requires the most amount of biscuits in order to catch, and it also happens to be the most difficult to evolve, so then it turned out that Master Biscuit would be the best value. But then there were problems with catching an ingredient specialist fully evolved. And what about Steelix? One that we don't often talk about because, well, there's no Steel Island yet, but it is one of the highest berry strength producers in the game. In fact, the highest if we ignore ingredients or skill strength. For those of you who don't want to wait until the end of the video to find out the conclusion, I'll tell you now that Raikou is absolutely fine to catch with a Master Biscuit if the friendship points fall somewhere between 32 to 48 to catch or more. And I'll explain how I got to these numbers towards the end of the video. But first, we're going to look at a qualitative analysis as to what Pokemon deserves to be considered for the Master Biscuit. Welcome back to another Pokemon Sleep video, it's Bro Vinny here. There are 3 factors that determine whether something is worth the Master Biscuit. Number 1 is that the Pokemon has to be very rare to encounter. Number 2 is that the Pokemon has to be very costly to catch. In other words, it has a lot of friendship points in order to befriend. And number 3, that is actually meta relevant. In other words, it's actually useful. There's no point of catching something if it's completely useless. So let's take a look at our candidates for these criteria. Criteria number 1, the Pokemon has to be very rare. Otherwise, why don't you just spend your bonus biscuit of premium bonus biscuit and just do it over many days or many weeks in order to catch it, because then you don't have to spend 4,000 sleep points. Well, Tyranitar certainly satisfied that criterion, because I mean, so far I've only seen Tyranitar once or twice. But of course, it actually doesn't make any sense at all because its base evolution, Larvitar, isn't actually that hard to find. And you get better chances at rolling good stats because you have a lot more catches with Larvitar using those 4,000 sleep points than trying to just catch the one Tyranitar. So while Tyranitar and Dragonite both fit the criteria of being rare spawns, their pre-evolutions don't. So it wouldn't really be too sensible to catch them, especially since they are ingredient specialists. They can really use their inventory up on evolution. Because if you didn't know, every time you evolve a Pokemon, you get 5 extra inventory than catching them fully evolved. Steelix is extremely rare. You can encounter Steelix at Taupe Hollow at very high tiers. So it also satisfies the rarity requirement. But what's interesting is that its pre-evolution is also quite rare, Onyx. And it's also difficult to catch. Onyx has 16 bars to fill in order to catch, whereas Steelix has 20. They're not actually that far off each other. And also being berry specialists, they are not as harmed by being fully evolved, because inventory is less important. In fact, having less inventory means that the Pokemon will reach sneaky snacking quicker, and sneaky snacking means that the Pokemon will be forced to do only berry production, and sometimes that can be a good thing. Of course, that also means that your skill won't trigger, but if you're catching it fully evolved as a Steelix, and you're just sneaky snacking all day, it's not like the skill level matters anyway. So for this first criteria, being very rare to catch, Steelix actually makes more sense than Tyranitar or Dragonite, because its pre-evolution, Onyx, is almost as difficult to catch. Absol also satisfies this first criteria because it's quite rare to encounter Absol. But where it loses out to Steelix will be point number 2, the value to catch, which we'll come to in a moment. How about Raikou? Now, besides next week's Raikou event, the wording from the developers' updates states that Raikou will be a rare encounter at Greengrass Isle. And given that most people try to avoid Greengrass Isle because they generally have too high of an area bonus, so the once or twice you do encounter Raikou, it might actually make sense to spend your Master Biscuit then. Who knows when it will come back again? especially if you're on 60% area bonus and you're not planning to hit up Green Grass Isle anytime soon. Point number 2 is that the Pokemon has to be very costly to catch. Tyranitar is 25 friendship points in order to catch. Dragonite is 25 friendship points. Both of these two Pokemon would otherwise normally require level 41 to evolve, which for a lot of people can be quite far away. So if you really wanted a Dragonite or a Tyranitar, even though it is harmful to catch them fully evolved, then for value, currently these two Pokemon would be the best for your Master Biscuit, until we'll find out how many friendship points it takes to catch Raikou, which I'm going to guess is higher than Tyranitar or Dragonite. But if we ignore Raikou for now, Steelix costs 20 friendship points to catch, which is also quite high, compared to Absol, which is only 16. Of course, you could catch Steelix as an Onix first, which is also 16 friendship points to catch, but catching as Steelix does save you a metal coat on evolution, which if you have to buy it from the shop, and I'm not aware that metal coat drops from achievements, in a way catching Steelix fully evolved actually saves you 1400 points, meaning that your Master Biscuit really, practically speaking, only costed you 2600 points. And of course, we don't need to talk about linking cord, we're going to consider that as a free item. So if you consider Steelix only really costing you 2600 points, the Master Biscuit sounds a lot better. Not forgetting that in terms of berry strength, and I've ranked them in order here, Steelix is at the top. So if you were after a generalist berry specialist, ignoring favorite berries, Steelix is the one to go for. How about the meta relevance of the other Pokemon? Well, Tyranitar remains to be the best ginger farmer. Unfortunately though, there are a lot of options for ginger. You could have berry specialists that could farm a lot of gingers, like Typhlosion or Marowak. And for dark berries, we do have a berry specialist, Houndoom. And if we were to compare the berry strength of Houndoom with BFS and Helping Bonus, Houndoom ranks at the top. Tyranitar does closely follow in second spot amongst the dark types, followed by Absol in the third spot. Very closely, of course, Absol and Tyranitar are ingredient specialists, so they would do pretty well given that they're actually ingredient specialists, but it's still not a Houndoom. On the other hand, this guy is nuts. If you give berry stats to Dragonite and Altaria having Helping Bonus and Berry Finding S, Dragonite only very narrowly loses to Altaria, even though he only farms 2 berries every production, whereas Altaria does 3. And the main reason is that Dragonite is just really fast for its berry type. So Berry Finding S Dragonite is no joke. It is almost like a Berry Finding S berry specialist, while farming ingredients. But of course you would already know that if you've been following my videos talking about the meta changes in the game over time with updates and releases and so on. The power creep that I'm talking about was more heavily covered in this video, so if you haven't checked this one out, make sure you go and watch that video. And of course, this guy needs no introduction. The only Pokemon to remain at the top of the number of ingredients that it can drop. No one else has 12 apples. No one else has 12 apples in their ingredient drop list. Of course, the only problem with Absol, as we talk about this time and time again, is the inventory, the carry limit. Since it cannot evolve, it doesn't benefit like other Pokemon do from evolution. Thankfully, in recent times, the inventory did get buffed a little bit. This number used to be 14. Unfortunately, if you actually rolled apples at level 60, that extra 4 inventory doesn't really help you that much. In fact, it might make no difference to your game at all. Regardless, there aren't too many ingredient farmers that do apples and cacao. You could argue Blastoise could do cacao, but then no one would be doing triple milk, mono milk. So if you want your Blastoise to be doing milk, then your Absol should be doing cacao. And for Raikou, we can assume that it's gonna be good. We can't prove it yet, we don't have the stats, we don't have the numbers, but So far, it sounds like Raiku's going to meet the third criteria. So, in my opinion, if we don't count Raikou biscuits at this point, from a qualitative analysis, we can see that Raikou and Steelix are the best for your Master Biscuits. Although for Steelix, I must admit that I did leave out one major point, is that if you're catching it as Steelix, yes, sure, it saves you one metal coat, but actually you're also one main seed down because you didn't evolve it from Onyx. Which, if that matters to you, then the whole analysis about it being cheaper for your Master Biscuit doesn't make sense. On the other hand, if you plan to use it fully for sneaky snacking, then it's going to be just the same anyway. Which means that Raikou is likely going to be the best value for your Master Biscuit because it satisfies all three criteria. One, it's likely going to be very rare. It's only going to be available as a rare spawn in Greengrass Isle. It's going to cost a lot. I'm going to guess it's somewhere in the 30 range, 30 plus friendship points. And it's likely going to be relevant with Helper Boost coming into the picture, being able to trigger 6 extra helps per Pokemon every trigger, going up to as high as 11 extra helps, and not forgetting that this skill can overstack your berries above the carry limit. I would say that it feels like I'm stating the obvious. Master Biscuit is best value on a legendary Pokemon. But if I'm wrong about any of those 3 points, for example, if during the Raikou event you can catch a lot of Raikou and overall it's not really considered rare, or number 2, you can spend Raikou biscuits during the event to catch it, which are worth more friendship points, therefore reducing the comparative value of using a Master Biscuit. Or number 3, if its skill is actually not that good, which I think is going to be unlikely, then you can ignore everything I've just said. Several people have brought up that it may be worth using your Master Biscuit on your first Raikou so that you can bring Raikou to its own event because it's going to be a Grepper Berry week during Raikou event. And then for subsequent Raikou, just slowly spend your Raikou biscuits. And I think there's merit in that thinking. There are a few downsides though. Number 1 is, do you have the resources, the Raikou candies to power it up, and also the main skill seeds to power it up right at the start of the event for it to be worth using? I mean, don't forget there's 2 other berries you can roll for Greengrass Isle. So Raikou needs to do better than at least one of your team members for it to be subbed in to be the helper. And the second issue is, do you even want to raise that Raikou? Because who knows what stats the developers are giving us. They said the first Raikou will have the same stats for all accounts, but it's unlikely they're going to give us the best stats for Raikou right from the start. So if you end up finding a better Raikou later on, your investments could have been wasted. Remember at the start of the video, I talked about 32 to 48 friendship points to be good value to use your Master Biscuit. How did I come up with these numbers? It's actually fairly simple, but there are a lot of steps. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to explain to you how I got to those numbers. First of all, we have to look at how much a Poke Biscuit is actually valued at in terms of friendship points. A Poke Biscuit gives 1 point, right? Well, unfortunately, in 10% of the times, it gives 3 points. So that means that in 9 cases, it's going to give you 1 point each. And then in 1 case out of the 10, it's going to give you 3 points, which is a total on average of 12 points for every 10 biscuits used, which is how I got 1.2 as the average value of a Poke Biscuit. So that includes Big Hit. It doesn't include Mega Hit because then it becomes a lot more complicated. So we're going to try and keep it simple. So we're just going to count Big Hit 10% in our calculations. Now the cost of a Master Biscuit is 4,000 sleep points. For a free-to-play player, each Poke Biscuit normally costs 150 points. So in contrast, it's a 27 times higher cost to use a Master Biscuit, which means the value has to be at least 27 times. 27 times 1.2 works out to be about 32 friendship points. So if a Master Biscuit were used on anything that's 32 or above, then you are getting your value back. That is how I got the lower end of the range, 32. for a Master Biscuit to be worth using. But not everyone is free to play, and let's also account for Mega Hit this time. If you're a premium user, normally it would cost you 100 points, 100 sleep points per Poke Biscuit. But you only really get 10 of them, which is not very much. So most of the time you're going to dive into the regular exchange shop for its biscuits as well. And you can get 30 of those biscuits at 150 points. So in total, you can spend 5,500 sleep points for 40 biscuits. On average, each biscuit is going to cost you 137.5 sleep points. If we combine both the regular exchange and the premium exchange, this is the average. So the cost of a Master Biscuit, still 4,000 because there's no premium shop Master Biscuit. But this time, instead of dividing by 150 for a free-to-play player, for a premium pass player, we divide by 137.5, which means that a Master Biscuit costs 29 times more than a Poke Biscuit. Each Poke Biscuit is still worth 1.2 times each. So for premium pass users, for a Master Biscuit to actually be worth it, a Pokemon needs to have 35 friendship points. It's actually a bit higher, and it makes sense because it costs you less to buy Poke Biscuits compared to a free-to-play player. So let me rephrase that. If you're free to play, you should be using a Master Biscuit from a value point of view if a Pokemon has higher than 32 friendship points. For a premium pass user, your number to aim for is 35 or higher, otherwise you should be using your Poke Biscuits. Now what if we actually account for chance to Mega Hit as well? Then it becomes a little bit more complicated, because how do you value Mega Hit? Mega Hit is an infinite number of bars that can be filled. So let's take some examples. 90% of the time, a Poke Biscuit will give you 1 times the value. 8% of the time, it will give you 3 times the value. And just 2% of the time, it's going to give you infinite value, which makes no sense. So what we're going to do is give it the current known maximum friendship points of a Pokemon, which is Tyranitar or Dragonite, 25 points. So the average value of a Poke Biscuit when used on a Tyranitar is 1.64, which if we divide by the ratio of, once again, the Master Biscuit towards the Premium Pass user's Poke Biscuit sleep points cost, you should actually be aiming for a Pokemon that has 48 point friendship points in order for it to be worth catching using the Master Biscuit. And that's a huge number. What this is saying is that if you drop a lot of Poke Biscuits, well, there's a chance that you might catch it because of a Mega Hit, which might have saved you a lot of sleep points. So it's trying to account for that fact. So if we look at it this way, there's almost no Pokemon that's ever going to be worth you catching with a Master Biscuit, which is why when we look at Master Biscuits, we have to look at all 3 factors and not just the value. We also need to look at how rare is that Pokemon going to be. If it's never going to come back, just use your Master Biscuit. And whether it's actually going to be a good Pokemon. Is it going to be something you use every day so that you can maximize the returns on your investment? Anyway, that's how I got to 32 to 48 friendship points, and there's actually a bit more maths that goes into this. I didn't cover everything in this video because it just got a bit too long and too complicated. That's not what I'm going for here. If you're curious to know more about it, let me know. I can answer it in the Discord or the comment section below. Don't forget that you can support the channel by pressing the join button on any of my YouTube videos.